Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Flash Pizza. That's right, I'm going to show you how to make a homemade pizza dough that'll be ready to top and bake in less than 10 minutes. And we're not using any yeast, and we don't need to wait to let it rise. And it doesn't just make a good pizza, it makes an excellent pizza. Oh yeah, finally, something that sounds too good to be true is actually true. And here's what we're going to do. To begin, we're going to prep a sheet pan with a piece of parchment paper that we sprinkled very generously with cornmeal, which is one of the keys to getting that real pizza texture we're looking for. And once that's set, we can move on to our extremely simple and fast flash pizza dough. And that's going to start with some self-rising flour, which is easy to find at the store. But if you can't or won't, it is very simple to make since it's just flour, baking powder, and salt. And of course, I'll give you those measurements in the recipe. But I do think the self-rising flour does work a little bit better because everything's milled into the flour and it tends to be a little bit of a finer grind, which is why it looks like it's smoking when you stir it. And then to this, we will add a little bit of white sugar, plus a couple tablespoons of freshly and finely grated Parmesan. And we'll take our spoon and give this a quick mix so that we can coat those little shreds of Parmesan with the flour, which will prevent it from clumping. And yes, please, if you can, use the real stuff, some Parmigiano Reggiano. And then once that's been stirred in, we can add our last two ingredients, which are a little bit of olive oil, plus some plain Greek-style yogurt. And while I'm calling this flash pizza because it's so fast and easy, what it could be called is 2-ingredient pizza dough perfected, which went viral a while back, and that contained just the flour and the yogurt. And it was fine, but it wasn't amazing. So I played around with it, and I discovered by adding those other 3 ingredients, we could achieve results that I think are far superior. But I'll save the rest of the self-congratulations till the end of the video. And we'll get back to the procedure, which involves mixing this with a spoon until we formed a very shaggy dough. Oh yeah, you heard me, a shaggy dough. And if you're not familiar with the always fun to say, shaggy dough, this is exactly what we're looking for. And once we get to this stage, we can clean off our spoon and switch to a hand, and we will mix and mash and squeeze until everything comes together. Or I should say almost all comes together. All right, it's still going to be a little bit shaggy, but that's fine because once it does get to this stage, we will transfer that onto our work surface, and we will continue pressing and pushing that all together until eventually about a minute later, it smooths out enough where we can start to knead it. And fair warning, at first it might seem a little too dry, but don't be tempted to add any more liquid at this point. All right, just keep smushing and smashing, mixing and mashing, and you'll see eventually it will smooth out and get softer, and you should be able to start kneading it like this. And by the way, if it seems a little bit sticky and it starts sticking to your fingers a little bit, do not be too quick to add flour. All right, just knead it for another minute and see where you're at, because we do not want this dough to be too dry. But of course, having said that, after about a minute or two of kneading, if you feel like it needs a few drops of water or a little sprinkle of flour, go ahead. That is just you cooking. But I'm happy to report mine was pretty much spot on. And after about 3 or 4 minutes of kneading, I was the proud owner of a relatively smooth, fairly elastic dough, which is exactly what we're after here. And believe it or not, that's it. No, there's no catch. That pizza dough is now ready to portion, roll out, top, and bake. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that in half, since this recipe will make 2 pizzas. And then using just enough flour so it won't stick, I'm going to roll out 1 portion to about 1/8 of an inch thick. And because I think it fits the sheet pan easier, I'm going to go ahead and make mine sort of an oval shape. But if you want a round pizza, make a round pizza. It's not going to bother me. But no matter what shape you go with, we do need to roll this nice and thin. Right, at least 1/8 of an inch or less. And that is one of the keys to getting a crust that's very similar to a real pizza dough. And that's more so about the texture. But in regards to tasting like a real pizza dough, that's why we use the yogurt. Since it has that beautiful tanginess, which will actually simulate the acidity that a real pizza dough gets as it ferments, which was the original brilliance of the 2-ingredient pizza dough recipe. But anyway, once we have that rolled out nice and thin, we will transfer it onto our sheet pan by flopping it over onto the backs of our hands, which is the safest way to transfer dough so it doesn't tear. And then the rest of this video is pretty much standard pizza operating procedure, which means we'll go ahead and spread over our favorite pizza sauce, going almost but not quite all the way to the edges. And like I've mentioned in pizza videos such as every single one of them, do not put on too much sauce, right? Just a nice thin, even coating. And that is a key for any kind of pizza, except for that stuff they call pizza in Chicago. But it's especially true here, and your self-control will be rewarded. And then next up, we'll go ahead and spread over our low-moisture grated mozzarella. And yes, we really do need to use that drier, firmer type of mozzarella, since fresh mozzarella is delicious, but it's way too wet for this. And just like the sauce, we do not want to use too much. And if you're keeping score at home, I'm only putting on about 4 ounces. And then I don't know about you, but after the mozzarella, I like to do a light grating of Parmesan, which is definitely optional, but also mandatory. And then once we're pleased with our application of cheese, if we're adding other toppings, this would be the time. And for this one, I went with some pepperoni. But if it works on a regular thin crust pizza, it will work on this. And hold on a second here, I got some spacing issues. But I do reserve the right to reposition, which I did. And then for a final touch, we'll go ahead and drizzle over a little bit of olive oil, just like any true pizza master would. You know, the same people that turned this video off about 45 seconds in. Hey, their loss. And that's it. Our flash pizza is ready to transfer into the center of a very hot 500-degree oven for about 15 minutes, or until it's beautifully browned and looks like this. Oh yeah, that looks like pizza. And please, make sure this cooks long enough. Okay, the only way to screw this up, other than all those other things I said, is to not cook it until that crust is well browned underneath. So don't be afraid to peek. And then what I like to do is transfer this onto a cooling rack and let it sit for about 5 minutes before cutting it up. Although if you wanted, you could serve this right away. But I feel like letting the bottom of the crust dry out just a touch helps it stay even crustier. But suit yourself. And then after letting mine sit for about 4 or 5 minutes, I went ahead and cut it up. And that, my friends, for a pizza made with dough that took less than 10 minutes to make, really does come out extraordinarily well. And like I said, the original 2-ingredient pizza dough recipe was pretty good. But by adding that little touch of sugar and Parmesan and olive oil, I think we have something that's much closer to a traditional thin crust pizza. And every time I make this, I really am shocked at how good it comes out. Okay, above and beyond tasting like real pizza crust, the texture is actually really close. Right, it's crispy on the edges and chewy, but also supple and flexible. And come on, look at that bottom. Which, not to brag, but we got with not only a 10-minute pizza dough recipe, but we did without a pizza stone as well. So I really do think you're going to be impressed. And it's with a lot of confidence I say, this will pretty much fool any kid and roughly 75% of all adults who've had a couple drinks. Which brings us to a possible ethical dilemma, which is, do we actually want to tell people how we made this? And if we are going to tell them, do we tell them before we serve it? Or after they're raving about it, then tell them? I'm not really sure, so I'm going to leave that up to you. I mean, you are, after all, the Ruth Langmore of whether you should explain more. But the point is, if you didn't say anything, a lot of people would not even notice the difference. Especially if you're not that great at making real pizza. Oh, and speaking of Ozark, one thing I always enjoy about that show is that even though the birds are murderous money launderers, they always serve a nice green salad with their meals, which I think you should do every time you serve pizza. And of course, by serving it with some nice dark leafy greens, it totally cancels out any ill effects from the fat and carbs. And if you serve it like this, you can pretty much have as much as you want. But no matter how you serve it, if you're in the mood for some homemade thin crust pizza, then I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.